we are delighted to have created an agreement for you to use. One of the most significant capabilities he brings to the table is his ability to do fingerprinting with mobile units. It can visit your sites. We think that will enhance your convenience a good deal. He also has two offices in the Philadelphia area where employees could go if they can't, you can't deal with them, their needs on campus. I also envision that as individual site visits are arranged, you all are welcome to use our listserv to coordinate between schools that are in close proximity. So with that brief introduction, Leon, we're delighted to have you and to learn more about Act 153 and how you can help us today.
Okay, Al, thank you very much. Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Today's webinar, an overview of PA Act 153 compliance requirements. As Al mentioned, my name is Leon Singletary, President and CEO of First Contact HR. Today, we're going to provide an overview of Act 153. We're going to discuss compliance requirements. We're also going to review the administration of the clearances pertinent to Act 153 and discuss some best practice screening. This presentation is for educational purposes and not intended to suggest legal advice. In the aftermath of the Penn State Jerry Sandusky events, a task force on child protection was formed by Governor Corbett. As a result, signed into law was House Bill 435, now called Act 153 of 2014. It was signed into law on October 22nd, 2014, and it amends and expands the background clearance requirements under PA Child Abuse Protective Services Law, known as CPSL. The expanded definition has a significant impact as it relates to the definition of schools. So school now includes community colleges, state-owned universities, state-related universities, private schools, and private residential rehabilitative institutions. And so when you think about clearances, the question becomes, you know, who is involved? Act 153 applies to employees. It applies to volunteers. It applies to contractors working in not just higher ed, but K through 12. K through 12 has a lot of experience in doing these clearances, but a new aspect would be how it applies to the expanded definition of schools. It specifically applies to any individuals who provide care, supervision, guidance, or control of children, or have routine interaction with children. A child is any individual under the age of 18. I would also suggest that there is a letter of the law which the definition implies, but there's also a spirit of the law, and that is, we all know that there are individuals within the academic setting who may not fit this definition of care, supervision, guidance, or control, but clearly have keys and access to children, and I would strongly suggest they be considered also when administering these clearances. When to conduct clearances? They need to be conducted by December 31st, 2015 if no prior clearances were obtained. And this may be the case in the event that individuals were grandfathered previously. For clearances conducted prior to 2008 with just child abuse and state police checks, now all three clearances are required by December 31st, 2015. There is a 3-year look back or 36-month look back. That's why 2008 is the date that you want to consider. Any clearances prior to that date would require renewal at this point. certain volunteers with 10 years of residency within the state of Pennsylvania are exempt from the FBI check. However, they do need to sign a certification. It needs to be notarized that they do not have any criminal convictions outside the state or any other behavior that would disqualify them. Beginning December 31st, 2014, clearances must be conducted prior to employment or service. Clearances, as mentioned, must be obtained every 36 months based on individual dates. Clearances must be conducted by December 31st if clearances are older than 36 months. So clearances that were conducted between 2008 and now, you need to look at the most recent clearance and use that as a date. And as that date is over 36 months or approaching 36 months, you must consider updating those clearances. Existing volunteers must get new clearances by July 1st, 2015. The former law, as many of you know, did not stipulate renewal periods. So many institutions had adopted their own renewal periods to address the potential of criminal convictions during breaks in service. Many institutions would institute, annual renewals or every 2 years and so on. Now the law is really clear. Clearances are now on a 36-month renewal period. This is good and bad news. The good news is that once the clearance is conducted, you have 36 months before they need to be renewed. The bad news is that if you have a large populations where you have to conduct all these clearances, then it presents an administrative challenge and sometimes a financial burden. Employers may need to create their own criminal record certifications for contractors and volunteers. In other words, if you don't have any specific guidelines in the contracts for contractors, you might want to consider providing those, as well as, if 36 months is a reasonable time period in terms of the expectation for auditing or contractors renewing their clearances. 36 months may be too long. Employers may adopt more stringent criteria than the law provides, and so that is something that all institutions should consider. There are some exclusions to Act 153. You want to consider the role and whether contact with children is on a regular basis, whether it's an integral component of the day-to-day job responsibilities, and if not, that may be an exclusion. If a determination is made that the employee does not have direct contact with children, clearances are not required. I strongly suggest, however, that you consult legal counsel when making these determinations. As mentioned previously, you do want to comply not just with the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law as well. Which clearances are needed? There are three. The Pennsylvania State Police Check, known as PATCH, the Child Abuse History Clearance, as well as a FBI criminal record background check. The PATCH and child abuse are $10 each. Those are government fees. And for educational institutions, the FBI fingerprint clearance is $27. Some institutions may have child care facilities, contractors, and others, and those clearances need to be processed with the Department of Public Welfare, now known as the Department of Human Services, and that clearance for FBI, the cost is $25.75 instead of $27. Grounds for disqualification once the clearances are complete. Any federal or state criminal conviction records relating to specific crimes, for example, homicide, rape, stalking, corruption of minors, will bar an applicant employee from employment. child abuse records over the preceding 5 years will bar an applicant employee from employment. A complete list of disqualifying offenses can be viewed on the PA Department of Education website. FBI results and arrests. We suggest that you exercise caution when viewing arrest records based on the FBI results that you obtain. Keep in mind, under EEOC guidelines, an arrest by itself is never job-related or consistent with business necessity. A person should be presumed innocent until proven guilty. And many arrests do not result in convictions. So you want to follow up on any recent pending arrests. Those are important because they could result in convictions. When you receive the FBI results, you may notice arrests and not necessarily know whether or not a conviction was the result. And so therefore, it is necessary to conduct a further research, perhaps a background check to determine that. And you may want to do that before having dialogue with the individuals so that you have your facts. No clearances are provided when employees, volunteers, or contractors do not provide up-to-date documents by the deadline. A couple things you should keep in mind. The individual should be removed from any position that has direct contact with children until the renewed documents are submitted. For new employees, volunteers, they can be considered provisional and placed in a provisional status up to, let's say, 90 days. The 90-day provisional status for employees, you have to comply with 4 components. 1, ensure that the subject has applied for all 3 clearances. 2, the employer should have no knowledge of any disqualifying information on the subject. 3, the subject needs to provide a certification of having no disqualifying criminal records. And 4, the subject is not permitted to work alone with children and must work in the immediate vicinity of a permanent employee who has been cleared. So here's a quick quiz. I'd like you to think about this. Which of the following actions should be taken if you suspect an employee has been convicted of a crime while employed? A, employer should monitor employee's behavior. B, employer should discuss with employee and run a background check. Or C, employer should verify the source and document the information discovered. So think about what response you would give to this question. The right answer, B. Employers should discuss the matter with employee after validating the source of the information. The employer should also conduct the 3 clearances to ensure that the employee continues to meet Act 153 criteria. So the law does require you, if you suspect someone to have been convicted of a crime, to run the 3 clearances again to make sure that they are still qualified for the position. Record keeping. Employer's point of contact is responsible for keeping copies of all clearances. An employer that intentionally fails to require an applicant from submitting the required clearances before hire commits a misdemeanor of the 3rd degree. Clearances are considered confidential and may not be released to other individuals. Quiz. Which of the following may represent a significant challenge in administering Act 153 clearances? A, obtaining information on processing clearances. B, determining the definition of a child. C, tracking and ensuring timely renewal of clearances. Or D, locating cogent sites for conducting fingerprinting. Give some thought to the answer. Which would you choose? The right answer? C. Employers will need to develop a system or process for accurately tracking when clearances need to be renewed every 36 months, providing advance notice to employees and volunteers to complete the process timely. So the administration of Act 153 clearances. There are 4 ways that we've determined for administering these clearances. Self-service, administered by the institution, a combination approach, or just outsource the entire process. Self-service implies that the individuals go and conduct the clearances themselves. The pros, there's lower costs, and you're using your existing resources. The cons, it can be time-consuming. It could be a non-core activity, and this is not just self-service, but also administered by the institution. It can be an administrative burden, and it requires staff resources to manage. It's challenging to track, as we also mentioned previously, and the goal of tracking is to remain compliant with the law. You can take a combination of approach. A combination approach is a part of it administering inside the institution, and the other part could be outsourcing. The pros, you can customize the process to fit your organizational needs. You can expand or contract the process or contract the process to meet financial constraints and other priorities. Cons, it requires some staff resources to manage, and there is some need to manage the vendor service levels as to whether or not they're meeting your goals. And then lastly, you can outsource the entire process. The pros, there's a consistent administration of the process. There are less staff resources used. It's easy to audit and remain compliant. And you want to partner with a subject matter expert to ensure smooth and consistent administration. The cons, there's a need to manage the vendor service level relationship, and there's the perception of it's more costly. Sometimes it is. Service capabilities. We're going to talk more specifically about First Contact HR's service capabilities. So other vendors may have some of these capabilities. First Contact HR, we provide these clearances currently to many of the larger institutions across the state. The process is very, very unique because we offer mobile cogent fingerprinting, as was described earlier. And we're actually able to complete fingerprinting on a mobile basis, 12 people per hour, up to about 100 people a day. As was mentioned, we have 2 facilities, one in Fort Washington and one in Center City, Philadelphia, 1015 Chestnut Street, which is the Jefferson Building. We also have the capability of administering the child abuse history clearance in 3 ways. We'll talk about that shortly. And First Contact HR can build a customized web portal for institutions, allowing for a online administration of Act 153 clearances. So here's a flow chart. And what this describes is a manual paper-based process. So when an account is set up, First Contact HR provides the client with an applicant consent form. We also provide you with the child abuse history form, which you're already familiar with. And the applicant completes the child abuse history form. They also complete the consent form provided by First Contact HR. Once complete, the First Contact HR consent form is faxed to First Contact HR. The child abuse history form is either mailed or we pick that up if we're coming to conduct mobile fingerprinting. When First Contact HR receives the consent form, we conduct the Pennsylvania State Police check directly. We also register the subjects on the Cogent website. And when we receive in the mail the child abuse history form, that is either mailed directly to the Department of Public Welfare, or we have the option to generate a payment code and provide that payment code back to the client, who provides that to the subject, who can process their clearance online. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that later. but in each of these cases, the results are returned to the subject. When First Contact HR processes the PA statewide, we order the Cogent registration number, or we register the subjects on the Cogent website. We provide for a email to the contact at the client within 24 hours. The client, upon clicking the link and accessing our portal, will be able to see the results of the child abuse history clearance, the registration, the Cogent registration ID number, as well as the results of the Pennsylvania State Police check. What they will notice for child abuse history is that we process that. If we provided the payment code, we'll be able to access the results of the child abuse history, and in about 2 weeks we send out back to the client the results of the Pennsylvania State Police check in a PDF format, as well as the child abuse history document in a PDF format, provided we process this using the online method. If we process the child abuse history using the paper copy, we have the ability, as some schools already have this capability, of having the child abuse history results returned directly to the institution from the Department of Human Services. We have another scenario, and the other scenario is where we create an online consent form. In this case, the institution would send a link to the subject, and in the link ask the subject to complete the online consent form by a specific date. When the applicant completes that information is accessed by First Contact HR, and we immediately conduct the Pennsylvania State Police check. We register the subjects on the Cogent website, and First Contact HR is able to email the subject a link to the state portal for the child abuse history. The subject then would set up an account if they don't have one already, input their information, and use the payment code in the email to complete the transaction. Once completed, First Contact HR is able to access the results of the child abuse history clearance, and we would report back to the client via email, where the client clicks the email and has access to our web portal, and will be able to see the Cogent registration ID number, the results of the Pennsylvania State Police check, and they would know that we processed the child abuse history clearance. This is all conducted within 24 hours from the time that the subject inputted their information. So the institution would always have access to our web portal, and the web portal would provide the institution with a list of all the clearances that we completed for their organization, the names of the subject, the dates that those clearances were completed, and the system allows you to cut and paste that information easily into an Excel spreadsheet. We would provide you with a macro that would calculate from the date that the clearances were completed 36 months out, so that you know the renewal date. And there's also another macro that will calculate 33 months out from the date it was processed, which we call the action date, so that you know 90 days before the clearances expire that you should start the process again. So expediting child abuse history clearances, First Contact HR can create a customized release form. There's a one-time fee for doing that. The release form allows the child abuse history clearance to be returned directly to the point of contact, and results are usually available within 10 business days on average. There's also a online portal for individuals to access, as I mentioned, and we could provide a payment code to individuals who go to this portal, and we would have access to the results. You as an institution can set up an account as yourself and administer these clearances. This is what the portal looks like. And so if you're an organization interested in conducting these yourself, at the bottom left-hand corner, organization account access, you can set up your own account. But if we were administering this First Contact HR, we would send a link to the subject and ask the subject to click create an account, and then they would log in as a next step after they receive their temporary password, and they would go in and input their information online to order their clearance. And as I mentioned earlier, if that was the case, we can access the clearance. And if you as the institution had an institutional account, you can access the clearance as well. First Contact HR is considered a third party, and third-party vendors may be used to process child abuse, Pennsylvania State Police, and FBI fingerprinting clearances. Third-party organizations are not permitted to conduct clearances using other databases in lieu of the 3 clearances described in this presentation. Institutions always remain responsible for their employment decisions based on the clearance information obtained. First Contact HR, we do offer a service where we can actually help you with adjudicating your records, help you create an adjudication schedule that allows you for making decisions, particularly as it relates to the FBI results. And as I mentioned previously, they can contain arrest information, and you want to be careful and consistent in administering clearances, at least adjudicating records as to whether someone is safe to stay employed. Let's talk about mobile fingerprinting. So clients of First Contact HR can reach out to us and schedule on-client site fingerprinting. It's a convenience for staff, volunteers, and sometimes contractors, and it helps you remain compliant. The nice thing about this feature is that for most of the institutions, there are large numbers of staff that you need to get through the process within the year 2015. So by partnering with First Contact HR and or working with us on a mobile basis, we're able to administer large numbers of employees, volunteers in a single month or multiple months. If you are able to administer clearances, let's say in the month of June 2015, it makes the administration going forward a lot simpler because, you know, by June 2018, you know that these clearances for that population, for that group, needs to be administered again. If the clearances were administered ad hoc throughout the year, it makes it much more difficult to comply with the law in terms of tracking. So that's why this service is so advantageous to many institutions. We're working with PACE BOA to consolidate clearances. So there are instances where if you have less than 40 subjects, you may want to partner, let's say School A, School B, School C may have, 20, 25 subjects each, but you may decide to pick one of those schools and have all the subjects convene at that one school to allow for all the clearances to be conducted in one day versus trying to, schedule those clearances on multiple days at 3 different institutions. Another approach is we're working with some school districts, for instance, and they may have 41 to 60 subjects, and it may be advantageous for First Contact HR to visit School A between 8 and, let's say, 11:30, and School B in the afternoon. As I mentioned, we can conduct 12 fingerprints per hour, so in a 4-hour time period, we can collect up to 50 fingerprints, let's say in the morning or afternoon. And anytime you have a need of 61 subjects or above, we suggest, we go directly to that institution, and as stated, we're able to collect up to 100 fingerprints per day. And keep in mind, when we collect fingerprints, we usually allocate a half an hour for, a lunch period for the technician, and 2 15-minute breaks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. let's talk about our web portal. The client's point of contact can monitor the status of the background screening clearances through our web portal. The processing status of clearance, for example, state police check, child abuse history clearance, and the cogent registration ID numbers are all combined in a single report. The web portal provides a database of all clearances conducted with the processing dates, as we discussed earlier. For organizations that don't have a human resources information system or another way to track these clearances, this provides a very easy administrative way to know where you stand. And as I mentioned, you can offload this data from our system into an Excel spreadsheet for manual manipulation. With this information, clients' point of contact can track and monitor the 3-year renewal dates. This is what the information could look like. You essentially would literally cut and paste the information directly into an Excel spreadsheet, and we would provide for a, this is the date that the individuals were screened. We would have a macro that would calculate from this date 36 months out that show the expiration date, which would be the renewal date, and we'd also calculate a date 33 months out that would show the action date. This is the date in 2016 or 2018 that you would initiate the clearances, again, allowing for a 90-day time period for them to be processed. Non-compliant subject communications. In some instances, you send out a link to subjects and they don't respond. In those instances, First Contact HR, you can notify us and we would have prepared for you 3 communications that we would send out to these subjects to help prompt them to click the link and to respond in a timely fashion. So there's a minimum cost for doing this, but wanted to make everyone aware that this service is available. When submitting background screening clearances, as I mentioned previously, if one was using an applicant consent form, they can be faxed right over to First Contact HR. We can also create a link where the applicants individually type in the information, and we also have facilities where individuals can come directly to us to process clearances. The custom web portal, when the subject clicks the link, this is essentially what the splash page would look like. It would be customized. It says ABC College, but that could be the name of your institution. The next screen would simply ask for some basic information. And then the third screen would be more demographic information required for registering the person on the Cogent website for FBI. The last page is providing consent and just clicking the button. And once they click the button, we would have access to the information. Clients of First Contact HR, the way they would access the portal is go to our home page and click Client Portal. They would next go to this page, and they would click Client Login, page 1, which takes them right here. They would have the opportunity to view reports. You can literally order a report individually if you like. And this is essentially the screen to drop down if you wanted to type in the information yourself for entering an applicant. And this is what the completed report looks like. Essentially, it would say if the records were pending. In some instances, for the Pennsylvania State Police check, if there are records out there, then it would say pending until we got those results back. The Cogent registration ID number would be right here at the bottom of the page. And essentially, everything you need is right here in one report. This would also include the payment code if we were conducting the child abuse history clearance online. For those PAYSBOA members, we're also providing access to HR View if you're working with First Contact HR. HR View is a value-added resource accessible from First Contact HR's web portal. HR View is like an online human resource department delivering tools to effectively manage staff. There's more than 500 downloadable forms. There's a job description builder and salary benchmarking tool, employee performance review builder, and a step-by-step. There are step-by-step guides for interviewing, hiring, terminating, and for conducting performance reviews. And for those of you that purchase posters for federal and state purposes, those are complimentary within this tool as well. So, implementation challenges. They vary by institution, but for some institutions, there's a challenge with defining the appropriate population in terms of whether or not they meet the Act 153 criteria. Clearly, communication for some organizations it can be a challenge. Some individuals, particularly in higher ed, might question privacy and whether or not there's an invasion of privacy in just collecting the information. But at the end of the day, you're required to comply with the law. Some may question the business necessity for these clearances, and obviously this is a legal requirement, and it is a requirement to remain in the job. This process can be very time-consuming for organizations, particularly for those with a lean staff. It could be an administrative burden, and to the extent that it wasn't budgeted, it could present a financial challenge. Tracking can be an issue, but we have talked about some ways to reduce the burden of tracking. And adjudication, making the determination whether or not one meets the criteria under Act 153 can be a challenge if there's no support or guidance in terms of consistent administration of that process. So let's talk about employer best practices. We suggest obtain the required clearances for all employees, independent contractors, and volunteers who routinely interact with children, design and implement new policies pertaining to the clearances, and revise or design a background check practice policies to include an adjudication process and an individualized assessment, which is a way to have a conversation with the individual if you are about to make an adverse decision based on the results you receive. Establish and communicate a provisional 90-day hiring period for employees. What this also suggests is that when you're hiring employees, you might want to get the communications out to the employee before they start, at least 2 weeks prior, so that the clearances are complete and you have the results before they start at the new job, versus having them in that provisional status. If they do interact with children from day one, that can be a challenge. You want to train your managers, hiring officials, and decision makers about Act 153 and its implications to the institution. Consider sharing a responsibility with employees to get clearances updated every 36 months through offer letters, orientation, HR policies, and annual employee communications. Employers may need to create their own criminal records certifications for contractors and volunteers. We talked about that earlier. And consider establishing common dates for processing large groups of clearances to ease the administrative burden of tracking the 36-month expiration dates. Business accounts can be established by employers to process payments for child abuse, FBI, fingerprinting, as well as the Pennsylvania State Police clearances. We talked about this earlier. Develop an adjudication process for Act 153 clearances, and consider the consequences of current staff, volunteers, and contractors if criminal records are discovered. What steps will you take, and how will they be consistent? Consider the need for all staff and volunteers to notify the employer's point of contact within 72 hours should they be arrested, convicted of a crime, or listed as a perpetrator on the statewide database. So that's another need to have a policy in place and communicate that policy so all employees, staff, and volunteers know what the expectations of the institution would be going forward. Contractor requirements. Update all contracts and relationship agreements to require clearance checks for contractors who may have routine interaction with minors. Provide contractors with a list of endorsed background screening vendors for your convenience, and establish audit procedures and breach provisions to ensure compliance. Get clearances completed early to avoid delays, as the processing system is expected to be overwhelmed. Staff or contractors with clearances hitting a 3-year mark in June 2015 should get new clearances started in early spring. Develop a date tracking system for all existing and new clearances, preparing to spread out submissions throughout 2015. And lastly, the tracking system should calculate the 36-month expiration date for clearances and provide a renewal tickler that prompts submission during a safe period at least 30 to 60 days prior to the expiration date, which we discussed previously. Oh, that is not last. Confidentiality. Keep in mind that information about applicants and employees, criminal records, they are confidential. Only use it for the purpose for which it's intended, and file background checks and clearances separately from employee personnel files. And with that, we'll take any questions. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss an overview
Unmuted.
of the 3 compliance requirements.
We have a couple questions, and if anyone else has more questions, then you can type them in. The first one is a question if they will be notified if the person ignores HR contact's email.
Okay, good question. So in the event that First Contact HR emails the subject regarding enrolling in the child abuse website, what would the follow-up procedures be? So in that email, based on clients' wishes, we would specify a deadline, and we would also follow up with a secondary email in the event that the deadline was missed. And after that attempt, we would reach out to the client and advise them of non-compliance and ask for guidance on next steps.
Okay. The next question is, must we renew all clearances for volunteers every year?
The answer to that question is no. Volunteers are like other clearances. They would have a 36-month renewal date. So therefore, volunteers whose clearances were completed, let's say in 2015, would not have to be renewed until 2018. There is a difference between clearances for volunteers and for staff and employees. Volunteer clearances, once complete, they're transferable from one institution to another. So a volunteer clearance that was completed for, let's say, a camp can be used by another institution, let's say a museum, if that person volunteered at the museum and wanted to use those clearances. For employment purposes, however, if your institution requested these clearances and those clearances were used for employment purposes, those clearances are not transferable to another institution, and so the other institution would have to initiate the clearances all over again.
Okay. Was there a credit report choice on your website?
In terms of credit reports, any institution that works with First Contact HR, we can conduct background checks as additional services. A credit report is clearly not a requirement under Act 153, but any of our other background screening services, including motor vehicle records research, criminal records across the nation, credit reports, employment, education verifications, are services that we offer and we can provide to any client.
Okay. The next one is back to background checks. If a parent is helping a teacher and not with the children alone, are the background checks still required?
That's one of those decisions that you have to make with discussion with your legal counsel. I've had many discussions with institutions. Pardon the expression, but there's a term, cupcake moms, or cupcake moms, required to undergo clearances. So if you have, moms that come in, with cupcakes and cookies and so on and so forth, and your policy is that they are being escorted into the classroom, they're presenting the cookies, they're reading with the children, there's always an adult there, the clearances are not required. So in that instance, if it was a single individual always coming into the institution, and you thought that responsibility, that duty was going to last more than 90 days or even more than 30 days, thinking about the provisional status, then you may reconsider whether or not those clearances are necessary. But as it stands, to the extent that you establish a policy where when volunteers come into the building, that they do not, go off unescorted, and that they're always in the presence of a cleared adult, then arguably the clearances are not needed.
Okay. I have a few people asking about the cost of services and how they find out about fees.
Okay. Yeah, good question. So we have a relationship with Pays Boa, and what we charge for administering all three clearances is $15, actually $5 per clearance. And if we were coming on site to conduct mobile fingerprinting, that's a separate charge of $10 per subject.
Okay. Are minors 14 to 18 years of age who work for the school as employees be required to meet the 3 background check requirements?
Good question. So that question comes up a lot, particularly as it relates to camps. And really it goes back to if the individual who can be age 14, can be 15, they're also under the age 18, but if they provide care, supervision, routine interaction with other minors, they're required to undergo the clearances.
Okay. Why keep personnel records and background checks in separate files? How long should one keep criminal records?
Good question. So I'll answer that in 2 ways. One is the reason why you want to keep criminal records reports and these clearances in a separate file from personnel files is the same reason why you want to keep I-9 documents and benefits documents out of the personnel file. Periodically, a line manager may request the personnel file for review. Periodically, an employee may request a review of his or her personnel file. If a manager, for instance, accesses a personnel file and that personnel file happened to have a FBI fingerprint clearance in the file, and it showed hypothetically some arrests from 7 years ago, that didn't disbar the person from working in the job they're in, but in the manager's view, they could discriminate based on that information and not necessarily elevate that person for a promotional opportunity. And so the question becomes, if that record is in the personnel file, can the information, i.e. the background check, be used to discriminate? And so the best practice is just rule out the possibility of any manager or even employee perceiving that management or the organization could, that information could adversely impact them. It's best to keep the information outside the file. And the best practice also is perhaps to file those documents electronically, so there isn't a physical copy unless needed, so that it is hard to for that information to get into the wrong hands. And then the other part of the question is about how long you should keep the information. Well, for the clearances, you at least want to keep it for 3 years, because in the event that you're audited, you want to basically be able to show that those clearances were conducted on a timely basis. You also want to look at your other policies and practices and just make sure that they're all aligned in terms of how long you're keeping other documents. Thinking about if you were ever sued, or if you ever had to produce those documents, what are your policies regarding the other personnel documents, making sure that you're consistent across the board. Some organizations have purge practices where they start, deleting documents and destroying documents after a certain amount of years. You just want to make sure that the clearances are consistent with those practices as well.
Okay. Sorry, we have quite a few more to get through. Does your service send a 90-day reminder to employees whose background checks are up for renewal?
Currently, we are not. We have not been requested to do that by any clients in terms of a process. That is something that for a organization that has a need for that, we can certainly discuss that. So we do provide for a spreadsheet that clients can use that would have the date we process the clearances, as well as the 36-month renewal date and a 33-month action date, and that is provided to the client to review and to administer. To the extent that that client would like us to prompt either them or the applicants, we can discuss that.
Okay. Can you enter dates of employees with completed clearances for future clearance in the Contact HR database being used by the school?
The information that we provide is, as I mentioned earlier, is provided in an Excel format. And as you know, Excel can be converted to other formats that some of our clients are using to upload into their human resource information systems, for example, Banner for higher ed, and possibly others.
Okay, this one we already answered. Can you suggest a way of asking clearances from volunteers without the volunteer feeling insulted? I don't know why they shouldn't feel insulted.
Yeah, I think the clearances today are it's required of the law. It's not something that an institution is requiring because of the subjective practices of the institution, and so self-included, if I volunteer to be a basketball coach at my kid's school and they require the clearances, that is what's required to do the job. So I think that just taking the position that it is a new law and a new requirement should be sufficient to make the request.
Okay. You might have already touched on this. Can the clearances be kept electronically, or is it necessary to keep paper copies?
You know, it's obviously every institution is different, and so as a best practice, I would recommend that you consider converting all the clearances to electronic copies, because then you know, physical copies are more likely to either get lost or get into the wrong hands. So to the extent that you have computer system and you can restrict access and you can keep all the clearances on an electronic file and back those up elsewhere, it would provide more security in terms of accessing those records. The other advantage of the electronic is when we provide back clearances to the institutions, it's last name first, client code, and patch child, and you also can do that with your FBI fingerprint records. You can print those to a PDF format, and so if you are looking for a clearance, a simple name search will pull it up very quickly versus going through all types of files to find that information.
What is the cost for the mobile fingerprinting?
It's $10 per subject. So in other words, if an organization called us up, they said they wanted us to come on August 15th to that institution within the greater Philadelphia area between the hours of 8 and 4, and there were 40 people, that would be $400.
Okay. Do you suggest requiring clearances from construction workers?
It is absolutely necessary. There's no question about it. So I would, construction workers are contractors, so if you have, now the question becomes, how long will they have access to the school grounds? If it's a process where, the person is alone in a basement, they're fixing the air conditioning unit, I would suggest that the contract with the contractor stipulate that any individuals accessing the school's premises, that they undergo those clearances. For individuals outside on the grounds, I would suggest that the contract with that organization specify that the individuals coming on the grounds undergo those clearances. Presumably, those contractors work with other schools, so the clearances that you request for your school would be appropriate for them to use when they enter other schools as well.
Okay. Can you expand on the lack of transfer of clearances from school to school? I thought documents that were less than 12 months old could be submitted to a new hiring institution.
Sure. It's one of those areas that higher ed and other institutions are not happy about, but it currently is it is part of the law where if someone if an institution required the clearances and that individual asked for those clearances, copies of those, that individual that other institutions not allowed to accept those clearances for multiple reasons. For one, if you were an adjunct professor, for instance, and you had the clearances conducted for one institution, and then 6 months to a year later, you said, "Oh, I had the clearances done, 6 months ago. Here they are." Well, a crime could have been committed within that time period, and therefore the new institution may not be aware of that crime because they accepted the old clearances. And that's probably the more significant reason why the law is what it is, because of adjudication reasons.
Okay. Would First Contact provide tech-only one-time macro application to school administration?
Can you repeat that question?
Would First Contact provide tech-only one-time, sorry, I just lost my spot, one-time macro application to school administration?
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand the question, but if I heard it correctly, would we work with institutions on a one-time basis for administering clearances? If that's the question, the answer is yes.
Okay. If you sub for several schools, do you need clearances for each school?
So if you substitute, yes, so, well, I didn't mean yes in that the answer is yes. I meant that I understood the question. But if a clearance is conducted for, let's say, a school district, for instance, the employer is the school district. And to the extent that the clearance was conducted for the school district, that clearance is transferable from one entity to the other because all the entities are tied together and related. And so in that instance, new clearances would not be required unless there was, for example, well, actually it wouldn't be required for 36 months, so that's acceptable. So, so the example of where a clearance would not be transferable is from one, entity, one completely unique school to another, but to the extent that they're all tied together and is a kind of a common employer, if you will, that's what allows the substitute teaching arrangement to work without new clearances.
Okay. Is there a ruling if the employer needs the original of these forms, or is a copy satisfactory? I'm assuming she's talking about clearances.
Yeah, well, if you are the employer, then yes, you should be receiving the original, and obviously the decision needs to be made as to whether or not you're paying for the clearance or the employee's paying for the clearance, employee or volunteer. So to the extent that you're administering the clearance, then yes, you would have the original, and then you would provide back a copy if you wish to the employee or volunteer. But to the extent that these clearances were presented to you as the employer, as I interpret the law, then it is required that you have that clearance in your file, and it is the original.
Okay. We run a summer camp, and counselors file the 3 checks in 2014. Would that mean that they would need clearances in 24 months?
Yes. In other words, if all 3 clearances were conducted in 2014, and you have a copy of those, and you have the originals, then yes, you just 36 months out from that date would be when those clearances should be renewed again.
Okay. What does the law state about the employee coming from out of state? Are there different clearances needed?
No. The same clearances are required. So to the extent that some institutions have employees who work out of their home and provide online education, they might be in California, they might be in Chicago, to the extent that those employees can still, solicit, interact with minors online, the same clearances are required. So those individuals can, go online to administer the clearances, or the institution can administer those clearances. And for out-of-state individuals, they can receive the card-based FBI fingerprinting cards. They take them to their local police, and those are submitted directly to Cogent for processing.
Okay. I think that's it. I received many questions about volunteers, clearances, and employees that don't have much contact with children, but I think I was able to combine some of those questions. If someone has further questions, can they email you?
Absolutely. So, for anyone that's interested in further information on our services or, have follow-up questions, my telephone number is listed right there. So feel free to give me a call, or you can email me at info at firstcontacthr.com. Thank you so much for the time, attention, and all these great questions.
Great, thank you.
This is Al, and I'd like to wind the meeting up then with my thanks to Leon for an excellent presentation. I think he gave you the impression that he is an expert in this area, and I think that's the case. He has been in business and doing this for quite a while. This is not just an issue of a one-time opportunity, if you will. He is, as you can see from the screen, a fully fledged HR professional and has been in this business for a while. I will post the agreement which we signed last week on our website. It'll have the pricing in it. Someone asked about the portal and the one-time cost of doing that, which I think some of you as larger schools will want to consider is $300. And let's see, what else? The fees are there. There's a modest reduction in the potential cost of doing the fingerprinting if schools get together and, in a sense, provide a day's work, because the otherwise minimum cost is $150 per fingerprinting session. So it makes a lot of sense to, at $10 a person, to really aggregate them to the extent possible for both his sake and ours. So thank you very much for your attendance, your questions, evidenced your interest, and the fact that you were paying attention and attempting to learn more about this. And we'll do our best to deal with those concerns as people roll out and get involved here. I've also connected Susan Jarrett and Leon because we want to be sure that the information in this area is consistently delivered. So their work is somewhat coordinated on this subject in that regard. So most of all, thanks for attending today. This session has been recorded and will also be posted in the library, particularly so that any of you who want to refer to either the documents that were shown on the screen or the conversation can do so. So have a great day. It's a beautiful one outside. Thanks so much for attending.